Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to Commissioner Wilson's virtual office
It's
hours.
Friday again, and it's a
Oh,
holiday weekend. Yay! How are you,
yay.
Lee?
Oh my goodness. I can't wait to sleep. That's what I'm going to do for Memorial Day is like
She saw a
rest.
scary movie last night, so
Yeah,
she
I haven't slept much.
you need to get some rest. It's really important.
Yeah, how are
I'm
you?
good. I'm good. It's been busy but good. We've had, a lot of sort of good news recently
Mhm.
and out in the world. So I hope that we can kind of touch on some of those things today and
Mhm.
share them with you and send you into a good weekend. I'll
Mhm.
start with well, hot off the presses, at least from um, my seat, was that our COVID positivity rate statewide is as low as it has been in, I think, since this time last year, or
Yeah.
actually before then.
Mhm.
So we're really, really, really marching down that COVID positivity
Mhm.
rate. And for those of you who are vaccinated, the CDC said, have fun this weekend. Have fun. Go to the beach. Go visit your friends. Have fun. If you've been vaccinated, fully vaccinated,
I feel the time of us not needing to give COVID updates like right around the
I know
corner.
it's coming. So we will do a couple of COVID updates, but we're really close. But some of them are because we want to make sure that if you haven't been vaccinated and you want to join the party, because it's a party, um, you can still do that. We had, the regional sites that are closing down or closed down because we really had gotten sort of the bulk of the people that wanted to come through in those first few weeks that we opened those.
Mhm.
The Barnett Park site will stay open. It's a drive-through. It doesn't require appointments. And I know for a lot of people, the had the first shot, they maybe missed their appointment for the second shot. If they had a second card, you can come down to the Barnett Park site. There are also lots of private sites right now. I think CVS, Walgreens, Publix, they're still all utilizing. They have a vast inventory of vaccine. So, please, 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 if you haven't so far, we now know that over 50% of Americans have. This is a safe and effective way for us to, get rid of COVID. I think about the I got my shot campaign, and they asked us, why did you get your shot? And I thought, because I never had polio or smallpox because of vaccines. And I'm so grateful for that science. And that's why I got my shot. I want to tell the story to my great grandkids about how I managed to survive a pandemic because I got my shot.
Mhm.
So that's, why'd you get your shot?
Oh, well, I just think about the amount of like privilege we have right now here in America. Like when I'm hearing these stories about India, my heart aches for the people that are good people that want to go to work, they want to spend time with their
Yeah.
families. But the pandemic has been very different for those other nations
Yes.
that don't have as much access. And it almost seems kind of like I should because others can't,
Yeah.
And so
Well, that's
that's
right,
why I
because
got
it's a
my shot.
global pandemic. I mean, it's a definition of pandemic, and this idea that you can somehow isolate by country because the
Mhm.
country has more resources. Until we get the globe vaccinated, we're going to be challenged to keep people healthy everywhere. And I think it's a good point. The people who do have the availability and the access need to get it done, and
Mhm.
everyone who gets it done makes the whole population a little safer. And
Mhm.
so, the way that community immunity works is this
Mhm.
idea that we boost the overall immunity
Mhm.
and keep the population safe with that overall immunity. And that's, like I said, you think about the fact that polio is, not a thing we have to worry about anymore because of vaccines. And I also think we've, heard recently there are, of course, like anything, um, people have fear, and that's understandable. But where there is fear and no knowledge about what their fear is, sometimes there's misinformation. So I just want to make sure that we're dispelling as many myths as we can. And a lot of people say things like, "Well, it's experimental." The COVID vaccine is experimental, and I think that's an absolute false narrative because an experimental vaccine makes it sound like they don't understand the research behind it. And really, the research that went into this vaccine happened over 40 years. Now, the virus itself is novel, right? It's the novel coronavirus. But the vaccine,
Mm.
the biomedical technology and research that went into it has been going on for some time and actually will be being probably applied in a lot of other treatments because it's really going to be life-saving and groundbreaking for other things.
Yeah, watch all these like Scientific America like videos of how this is one of the fastest working, innovative vaccines that they've come up with over this just a year. I thought this was going to be 2 or 3 years when we
No,
shut
right.
down.
And I think we all know somebody who has, really suffered or lost their lives to this. And the idea of being able, after a year to do something proactively to stop it is such a miracle. But I think, we have to thank a scientist. The scientific method doesn't matter what myths, what conspiracy theories are floating around out there, because the scientific method is the scientific method is the scientific method, and it doesn't change based on politics, and it doesn't change based on, crazy theories. So it's something that I feel very confident in. My father's a researcher and a scientist. We were just talking about, my husband and my brother both take care of sick people. So I feel very grateful for, this turn, kind of where we're turning the corner.
Science.
Science.
Let's applaud for science.
Yay, science. Exactly.
You also, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, so really quickly, Barnett Park, you can get, I think they have testing there still. I'm pretty sure they also, the drive-through COVID-19 vaccination site, I've heard it's really well run and smooth and easy. Also, vaccines are eligible right now. The Pfizer vaccine for 12 and up, they do need parental consent if they're under the age of 18. It was an easy process. It's a one-pager. I did it for my under 18s. And so just if you have any questions about that, reach out to us. We can walk you through the steps. And yeah, I think that was pretty much it. I think the other part of it is, if you're still interested in the rental assistance program, there are funds available. Please visit the ocfl.net page, and they're processing those applications.
Yeah, we had a friend of ours that was in a meeting with us it was like a 20-minute meeting, drove through put their screen on and drove through the vaccination site while in a meeting with us. And it took like no time.
She was like, oh, hold on one second.
Here we go.
Had her mask on, got her shot.
And then just drove off.
Driving. I'm like, did you just finish? She's like, yep, done.
Yeah, done. Like that. Easy peasy.
Great, wasn't it?
So you had a Vision 2050 back-to-back meeting.
Yeah, and I apologize for bringing supplemental materials here, but I want to make sure I get my dates out there. Vision 2050, as a recap, is the update to the comprehensive plan here in Orange County.
Gets me excited.
Orange Code. Because it says 2050 doesn't mean we're waiting to 2050. It doesn't mean, it means we're really going to be updating the code when we get the language that's needed. The updates that are happening now, or the ongoing meetings that are happening now, are sort of in a presentation. They call it a town hall, or they call it a community meeting, but it really is more of a presentation. But there's a question and answer that goes on throughout the whole presentation. And the update this week, this is series 3, and I was just blown away by the engagement we had by residents from areas that have really been impacted by poor planning and zoning issues. And so the questions that people asked were spot on. I think planning can be thick, right? There's a certain vocabulary that goes along with urban planning that doesn't make it super understandable for, the people who don't work in that world or don't have an interest in it. And I think sometimes it's a little bit of a turnoff. People want to really participate. I love that people hung in there and they asked the questions. I will tell you, even if you study the code and they said this on this meeting, that the employees here that come in that are trained in that type of job, after a year, still don't understand Orange Code, which is the reason why they're having to update it. One of the many reasons. So there was a consultant that the county has partnered with that actually breaks down sort of where they're seeing the biggest issues. The consultant obviously it's a national firm, so they don't live here, but interestingly, they understand a lot of the challenges already by having studied what we had in our existing code and what we had in our existing comprehensive plan. We had questions this week from residents asking, why if we have empty strip malls and empty retail spaces, why are we continuing to add retail spaces on the edges of town? Because these particular residents were concerned about what those abandoned buildings were doing to their property values, what it was doing to crime in their neighborhoods. And so, you think about the concern we hear in District 1, because we are on the edge of town, about what urban sprawl is doing to affect the environment or to affect our schools or traffic. But we also have to consider what that's doing to the people that were living right next to a retail or a restaurant or some other resource that it's gone now, right? Because the opportunity left with the new development, and what that does is it leaves all these opportunities for infill. And I think we're just going to have to continue to really remind and pester the powers that be on that department. The infill needs to be a priority. It needs to be incentivized. We need to make sure that we're looking at it not just for the convenience of residents, but also for crime prevention and for economic drivers, employment opportunities. And so all those things converge, and that was part of the conversation for 2050 this week, which was pretty cool. The dates of the upcoming, hold on. So the next meetings 3 and 4, which are going to talk about proposed zones and use categories, land use categories. This is really important for all my advocates out there. June 7th and June 8th at 6 p.m. I was a little frustrated this week, Lee, because on one of the nights of this very important, what I felt like community engagement event, discussing our comprehensive plan and the Orange Code, there was also a community meeting about a controversial development in District 1. So, even though this is kind of coming from the same department, and I would have hoped that, understanding that a lot of times the residents that are concerned about what's happening in our overall comprehensive plan and our code and what's happening to specific parcels of property would be some of the same people, that they would try to keep an eye on that calendar. They didn't. We will. I will try to make sure that we raise our concerns if there's some kind of an overlap that we might be able to avoid in scheduling.
Yeah, and for the community meetings, I think from now on, and you and I can talk about this plan even more so, but I think I'm getting into a flow now of really marketing them way in advance, and now we're going to start streaming them on Facebook to make them even more accessible. Some of the comments that were brought up during that are very similar to the comments that you heard during the Vision 2050
it's
of
the same concerns about
why when you have a very urban area and then a rural area, and then you put a development way out that is going to
12
basically
miles away from the urban boundary.
Yeah, you're basically incentivizing more businesses and things to get that urban sprawl kind of mentality into that zone, which is going to force people to drive more, putting more density on the roads. And it creates a recipe for disaster.
Right. Well, and I think, I thought it was very interesting because the consultants really did point out the inconsistencies that way. And they discussed at length how it ends up having, they end up having to send before us, which is what I, almost want to cry about every 2 weeks. These PDs that come before us that don't fall into what was supposed to have been the way that the original code was written and the way the original comprehensive plan was written. And so there's, inherent inconsistencies, which is why this is such an important process. And like I said, if it seems cumbersome, the vocabulary seems cumbersome, that's okay. We don't have to be experts at it. You sort of know what works in your neighborhood or what's frustrating you. I thought it was very interesting to hear people say things about, and I've brought this up, we talk about it often, that as a community adds some retail grocery stores, that if there isn't a crosswalk right there, that people are just going to be trying to cut across traffic. So either they need to be, on the same side of a thoroughfare, or that thoroughfare needs to look more residential, or we need to really be very thoughtful about the way that we put in, what goes on each side of an intersection to make sure that if people need to get to both sides, it's safe, and that means not making it 9 lanes at 60 miles per hour. That means, if there is a bus stop nearby, that we're making sure to be really cognizant of the transit users. It means that if there's a school nearby, that we're being very cognizant about what, comes along with the school, which is oftentimes there's some kind of a daycare facility nearby, or there's some other type of community structures that are inherent in those uses. So yes, please tune in. We'll keep reminding on June 7th and June 8th, and then again July 7th and July 8th.
Awesome. Yeah, if you look at a 9-lane road, it looks like you need to get a car to have a really good quality of life to live in that community. When you go to places like in Europe where everybody's walking and crossing the road, it just feels like you can thrive
Yeah.
without a car. It
Yeah, and I
feels so
think
nice.
it's, I mean, but it's interesting because I think the reality is we're going to need some thoroughfares to be larger and to have capacity for things
Yeah.
like trucks and buses, larger vehicles, and for higher speed, right? So that's your 50. That's your obviously I-4, the big arteries. But really, if it's a residential area and if there's a school, they should never look like that. It should never look like an I-4. And, if we speed it up, people are going to get killed. And that's what you see all over Orange County. They talked about it in the Metro Plan meeting. I was fascinated to hear Metro Plan's staff talking about how much faster the roads are here in Orange County than all over the country, in residential areas, and how dangerous that is. We hear from residents all the time. We hear from law enforcement. And I think that you can't put this all back on enforcement. We need to code and design for safety. And so that way enforcement can be very specified, right? Where there is a problem, because those things shouldn't be built into our system.
Well, that reminds me, I went to the Brightline grand opening to see their maintenance facility of where some of those high-speed trains are going to be
So cool.
serviced. And I just saw, like, for a second, the future in my
It's so
head.
cool, right?
Now, this is a private entity,
Yes.
which is fine, but I feel like internally with Metro Plan Orlando, they need to have discussions about the future of transportation
Well,
at large.
and they did talk about that because it's going to take a private-public partnership. Government doesn't have all the answers, and especially when you look at things like, inner city, interstate, high-speed rail, right? This is a high-end, very expensive project to bring high-speed rail like this. They're doing some things that are really smart because they're using existing transportation corridors, which are then going to keep, some of the impacts down as far as financially and environmentally. But it's something that needs to be a public-private partnership. So, my hope is that continues to really facilitate what I think is everybody else's vision for how we can then match that high speed with the inner city and make sure that we're getting that commuter portion of the rail. I say it all the time. I cannot wait to get my cup of coffee and sit on my train to come to work.
I know.
Get out of my car. I want to come to work on a train.
Yeah, even if they had stations like for links and things like that were like you could drive maybe to one of those main artery roads, park for the day for free, and then I could use public transit.
Yeah.
We don't even have that.
Right. Park and ride would be great.
I remember in school, it used to take me like an hour, maybe even 2 hours to get from. I had to take 3 different buses to get to school when I first started college. It was just too
And that's
much.
prohibitive. It's prohibitive, right? It's not. It doesn't work. So then people are either in a position where they are consistently having to either turn down opportunities that are outside of whatever the range is that they can get to on our public transit, or they're having to go into debt to get a vehicle that maybe they didn't need if we had public transit, or and then you talk about the environmental impacts of that. So I think we're all on the same page. It seems like everyone I talk to feels this way. They understand we can't continue to add lanes. It just does not work. That the way that this area, people are very attracted to it. I understand why. I love it here, but we have to really be smart. We have to be able to understand that higher density areas and the places that matter will keep our lower density, our rural areas rural, and that good transit options will be able to keep our environment protected and move those people around.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about the last BCC, May 18th. You had a lot of awesome conversations. One that, we kicked us off was the mental health and behavioral analysis that Donna Weish brought up.
Yeah. So, we ended up having back-to-back BCCs, right?
Yeah.
So we were supposed to have had the BCC on the 25th. The mayor's team moved it back to the 18th. So it was really tight. It's obviously it was a very packed agenda. So, but really important information I want to apologize to all of the wonderful people that work in our mental health services that I wasn't in green that day. I didn't get the memo, but it doesn't mean that I'm not with you at all times. And I joked with Byron. I was sitting next to Byron during the meeting, and I said maybe the red actually matches my emotional state a little more, because there were so many really important topics that I know that kind of had my blood boiling, or my heart beating a little bit. And I think one of those is the behavioral mental health component. We know that we are coming out of a pandemic that had people isolated. There are the obvious social stresses involved in some of the transitions people had to make in employment and in education, the isolation. I think the people that were probably the most affected are our oldest and our youngest. And so those people are going to have a long road back. And so understanding that there are resources that we have in the county, and that there are resources that are going to be coming in from the federal government that we need to get plugged in to help people with their mental and behavioral health, like as soon as we can. I was obviously really, really focused on finding solutions during that meeting. I know if anybody tuned into that, and I know those BCCs are long and boring, but I just wanted to make sure they heard me saying that I'm worried that the District 1 doesn't have the same type of resources that we see in downtown Orlando and some of the other districts. We don't have a drop-in center. We don't have a central receiving center. And I just, I want to make sure that people who are listening to this know that you're not alone. If you're going through something, we will help connect you to resources. There are really great medical providers out there that will connect you to resources. If you have a trusted pastor or rabbi who can connect you to resources, those are all things that we, when it's the hardest to do it is when we need to do it the most. And so, it's an emotional conversation. It's important. And I'm glad that the mayor and that we are, as a board, acknowledging the need for more work in that particular net.
Yeah, and suicide was brought up a lot during that conversation. I think that could tie also into another topic that was discussed, the Youth Advocacy Council. The youth are carrying a lot of weight right now in terms of like climate change impacting their future. Right now this generation is making 40% less than their previous generation. And, like, with all that being said, I think hearing the youth's interpretation of what's going on in their community is also important. And COVID has really struck a lot of people in their mental health.
Yeah, absolutely.
In our youth.
So there was a discussion item about having a sort of a youth advisory board. Our charter requires advisory boards to be made up of people who are of voting age. Commissioner Uribe thought that having an advisory board that maybe wasn't necessarily like a voting type advisory board would provide us an opportunity to get not just that type of engagement, but also getting a fresh view on some of these things, right? Like, how do we get to talk about providing the best type of services for our youth that are struggling or suffering right now without talking to them? And she discussed, service opportunities and civic engagement. And it blows my mind how little understanding not just youth, but adults across the board have about how local government works. And so really having some kind of a youth advisory panel like that would provide an opportunity for all those things, right? Being able to have some kind of a civic engagement where they understand the function of local government, us being able to hear some of their input about where we really are falling short in engagement or services for the at-risk youth in this community, and being able to offer maybe some places for them to plug in for future employment or internship or educational opportunities. So I thought it was actually a really great discussion item. I know that it was sort of tabled for now, but I would be encouraged to continue the conversation. Maybe it will not look like an advisory board. Maybe it'll look like something else, like some kind of a leadership course that we can do, on some kind of a 6-8 week rotating leadership course. But we'll continue to try to figure it out. If you have ideas for it, please reach out, because this is where I think the solutions are. And I believe the young people especially can see things with fresh eyes. They haven't been in, the bureaucracy. And so if they have an idea that could work to really help our community at large, we don't want to shut them off. We want to bring them in. So that's sort of where I think there was, the kind of view for me, and I know for a couple of the other commissioners.
Sidebar on that, bringing in youth, we have 3 new interns starting. So we're very excited, and we'll probably have them on to introduce
Yes,
themselves. That would
yes.
be a fun segment.
I am so excited because, once again, I think that I can learn, every day. I want to learn. I didn't get to, I think, get the type of engagement that some of the kids that are coming out of these programs are getting now.
Yeah.
That now I can learn from them and then plug it into really my everyday stuff. So I'm super excited to have them here and on the team. And it's going to be a good summer.
Well, then in the second half of that BCC meeting, you had a couple big things to talk about. You had the Econ River protection discussion.
Yes. So, as you all know, Orange County residents who are tuning in, during the November election, we were really overwhelmingly decided as a county, and I mean, what was it, 89%
Yeah, it was like
voted in
89,
approval of a protection that gave the right to clean water. I think there's this understanding that we have a right to clean water. That is not the case. There's nothing in the Constitution. Our founding fathers couldn't contemplate that people would really pollute their water to the point of not being able to live anymore. So to put that in writing and to include that in our charter was something that came from the citizens. I helped with that initiative. It was a really wonderful grassroots effort to make sure that we have that the waterways of Orange County have the ability to protect themselves. If you don't think it's a needed thing, red tide's creeping back up. If you guys saw on the West Coast, you can't swim off of several of those beaches anymore. Anybody that watched what happened in Piney Point knows the permitting system fails us again and again and again, because ultimately it is permission to do something, to pollute to an extent, to release something to an extent. And so it doesn't operate the same way. The right to clean water is a very fundamental idea that that entity, the body of water, has rights that can stand up in a court of law. People who are like, oh, a river can't have rights. Well, I'm here to tell you that a corporation is offered those rights. They actually get personhood in a court of law. And so I think that if we look at the other applications of personhood and rights discussions in a court of law, it's absolutely possible and doable. And it's something that if we don't do, I think we're going to end up perishing as a as a species, and maybe we deserve that. I don't know, but I think that what Orange County decided in November, overwhelming, right? This wasn't an accident. People didn't accidentally bubble in this right to clean water. It was absolutely a conscientious. It was a 3rd page ballot item. And so the idea is to try to make sure our ordinances reflect what was put into the charter. In full disclosure, I didn't have a lot of heads up really coming into whether or not that was going to be something that would be on that particular agenda, because this was the meeting that was moved. And I was a little frustrated, Lee, because the week before, so every 2 weeks we have things that come up, land use issues that come up. Many of them since I've come here affect the Wekiva study area or areas out near the econ, and they come up and they go, and I'm the single no vote. And the week before there was a staff initiated text amendment basically deleting the open space requirement in the Wekiva study area, and I was the only no.
So can you explain what that means for those people who are like, what do you mean open space requirement?
So there are certain places that have already been designated as being environmentally sensitive in the Wekiva area, despite what we voted in and what the state has. It designated not just the river as important, but the area around it, because what we know about water is it percolates through the ground.
It doesn't always stay still.
It doesn't always stay still. And what comes through the ground is important in how, what comes out of those springs. And so the study area is sort of where we know or think that there's recharge, where there's water coming through and entering the aquifer again. And so these are areas that should be of great concern when we think about our water quality. And this isn't just about recreational water quality. This is going to be really, what'll be left of our consumable water as well. So this is all very precious water. And every 2 weeks, there's another, development process going through. Much of it is on private land, which is difficult to then have, complete control over how to protect that. Understanding our state laws are very, very protective of that private property right. Like, that's fine. One of the things that we had was an open space requirement, which basically said that if this piece of property is to be developed, that a certain percentage of it has to be open space, because we need that area to absorb and recharge the water, because we know where it is in the Wekiva area that it's going to end up back downriver. Okay, so this is a really important area to keep an eye on, that open space and human activity in general. And this staff initiated item basically deleted the open space area for the rural overlay and diminished it, cut it down for the Wekiva study area that was in what they consider intended growth areas, but it was still in the Wekiva study area. So I opposed it because I think anything in the Wekiva study area should be treated with the utmost scrutiny and really, when you look at it, using what we know is in the charter, which is that we are now on the hook if we don't protect the Wekiva, right? It is literally in our charter.
Yeah. I mean, for staff to initiate this, that says to me that someone looked at this rural area and said, there's a percentage of land that is required to be open space. We want that. Well, not really they want it, but there's some reason why staff would want this to have less of a requirement to promote more development.
This development pressure. But this one in particular, had it been voted no by the commission, wouldn't have. So a lot of times, if you look at those development plans, if we vote no, it really will end up likely in a court case for either a taking or a Burt Harris, which is sort of the Florida version of a taking, kind of an uptaking, which means that the government has basically said you can't use your land for what you want to, so they have to pay you money for it. This wasn't one of those cases because it was really staff initiated, and it was a change of language in order to make the area more developable. So there wouldn't have been any consequences to voting no to it. And so I tried to explain it. I tried to ask. I mean, I was so frustrated because and I love this. I love our environmental community. There's outpouring of concern and support for the charter amendment and for the update to the ordinances to reflect the Wekiva. But when it really matters, when the rubber hits the road and I'm sitting there and I'm saying, please, this is our opportunity.
Help!
We were getting ready to take a vote and I'm the only no. And so, if you go back and look at the video of the BCC that day, you might be able to see me singing, "One is the loneliest number," because I just felt like I was just, I felt like I was speaking as as somebody that was completely independently thinking, but it wasn't, because this is what Orange County asked for. Orange County asked for protections for the Wekiva, which includes anything that may be dripping through this ground out there, which is what we know is happening. So,
well, this is in all my years of climate advocacy. It took me, I'm 30 years old right now. It took me up until now to realize that the work that you're doing in those chambers, that's the front lines of where our future is going to go.
That's it.
That decision-making process right there could have irreversible damage to not just even the Wekiva study area, but to the mindset of where the county's going and what we allow and who we are as a county.
That's right.
And so for all of you that go out and you march and you yell into your megaphones which is awesome, which is needed, please, please, please grab your cup of coffee and watch the BCC and learn the language and show up to give
Or,
public
or if
comment.
there's a question, call us. Get engaged.
Get
Let us know because
engaged.
I want to try to figure out how to make it more digestible. I do think that's hard to do. It's not. You know what? I have a brilliant attorney friend who I sent that particular a text amendment to, and he said, "What is this gobbledygook?" Now, this is somebody who's practiced law for 30 years.
Gobbledygook is a legal
It's a legal
term
term
that means
of art that means something that came out of development, right? But so
it was
yeah, our planning and development department, they are wonderful people. They're doing their job. I understand that, but there are tensions at play and there are pressures, and those pressures from the side of development. There's a lot of economic incentives, at play here, and I think for a really long time the mindset was we got to grow, 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 because that's how we're all going to get paid. No one's getting paid from that except for the people who are doing that. What we now know is that if we don't figure out the infill part of it, and if we don't figure out how to make sure that we're redeveloping, we're just going to run out of space and oxygen and water, and then we're really going to be suffering, right? Because what you moved here for in the first place is going to be gone. So,
yeah, I guess elected officials sometimes, that's not always their biggest concern. And the fact that you're out there and you're saying, hey, this is a concern because you're being the voice of the people, that's.
well, like I said, I tried really hard to take a deep breath because I was really upset when I came out of that meeting. You see me, I was really upset because I know that, I really respect the other people on the board, and I don't want to put them in a position of I don't want to make it sound like I am dismissing the work they do. But I do think that sometimes, we want to get out of there, right? It was literally the last agenda item of a meeting that had started 8 hours before. And I just, I kind of question, is that on purpose? It was right behind a green space
Yes.
acquisition. Was that on purpose?
Yeah.
And I don't, I don't know. All I know is that I'm going to continue to really try to communicate with you all as residents and with my colleagues about the things that I see that I think that they will be of public concern. If it's a
Yeah.
public concern, I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to ask you to look at it and tell me what you think. You can disagree with me, and then maybe I'll, take in some other ideas. And that's what this is all about because it's a democracy. I think every decision I make in there, I'm taking with me not just my own feelings about protecting those things, but also what the democracy said, which was that we want to protect these things, right? So if I know the voter mandate was to protect these things, then it really is kind of inherent. Like you got to do that, or else I'm neglecting to do my job. So yeah, it was a bumpy week for us.
Well, you also had a continuation of a case that day as well. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I won't have to get like deep down into it. I just, I'm trying really hard to make sure that, a lot of the planned developments that are outside of our code, which is why we're updating the code, were approved in 2015, 2014, in this one in particular, the original plan development, which really altered the way that this area should have been zoned or was originally zoned in the Orange Code, was approved in 2015. And then, the applicant comes through and wants to modify it. And I think some residents really offered up some very important points about their concerns. The part that makes me really sad is that I wish that the decision that was made in 2015 had been made with those concerns in mind. Because unfortunately, once that approval goes through, it doesn't matter if I vote no at the next one, or if I don't make a motion to approve at the next one. It just means the modification of it doesn't go through. So the plan development itself will go through. And so, I want to make sure that if you're reaching out about something that you're seeing coming across the agenda, we'll dig in, find out where that first planning approval went through, and then find out from there what we can do to try to mitigate the damage that we're seeing. Because some of it, I can't just, I can't put my cape on and just stop it, right? So, so we have to really be creative, and I need you to continue to let me know what you're seeing on your end. The two residents that spoke up during this may have spoken in 2014 or 2015, and they may, have been unheard at the time. But I think that the points that they made about their concerns are even more relevant now that the amount of space that we have is decreasing.
The last thing that was brought up, and I think there's just one more meeting on it, were backyard chickens.
We're there. We're just about there. Yes.
Yes, I didn't tell you this yet, but I was in a Good Food Central Florida meeting, which is a committee that was organized by the city of Orlando that were talking about the city's ordinance for chickens, and they're modeling a lot of the same things. So this is happening.
Yeah.
It's happened in Winter Park.
Well, that's, yeah.
I think you said Winter Garden as well.
Yeah, Winter Garden has already had it, and it's interesting because I think people who think about county and city, and you think, oh, the county is going to be the one that has the chickens first, and the city, but it's the other way around. But that's because some of those unincorporated areas were more, sort of suburban, or it was, if they were already zoned for ag, then they didn't have to worry about it. But this is really set up. This particular ordinance is really set up for people who, during the pandemic and even before that, this idea of really having our own ability to feed ourselves and being back in touch with, the critical needs that we have to be self-sustaining, right? So can we produce our own energy by putting solar panels on our roof? Can we produce our own, vegetables in our garden? Can we produce, have protein from, our chickens giving us eggs? And it's a very tailored ordinance, which means that it's not made for agriculture. It's for chickens of a particular kind. I think it's the ones that are the most common for eggs, and there's specifications that are required to have one of these backyard coops with the chickens. And there's a class that you take through IFAS, which is the partnership with University of Florida for how to raise backyard chickens, so that you have an education about that. We want to make sure that we're being kind to all of our feathered friends. And then there's really some pretty, I believe, good zoning rules to make sure that we are being cognizant of all the neighbors. So, for instance, if you have gone through the class and you're in an unincorporated area and you get your backyard chickens, but you sell your house, that permit doesn't go with the coop or the house. That permit goes with the individual, because the next person really needs to also take the class. And so I thought that making sure that non-transferability was an important thing to protect, the area, the chickens, and the integrity of the ordinance itself.
Awesome. We have overwhelming support,
Awesome,
coming in through the inbox. If you have any questions, email district1@ocfl.net. And
I did want to say really quickly, because I think this one has come up in sort of casual conversation out and about the backyard chickens. This obviously isn't going to be inappropriate, or it's not going to be able to be applied where there are HOAs. HOAs kind of homeowners associations operate their own bylaws. When you purchase a home that is in a homeowners association, you agree to certain conditions, and some of those conditions are things like that you're not going to have a certain structure in your backyard, or you're not going to have a certain other feature. So you check with your HOA. I'm pretty sure that this will exempt those. And then if you have any questions about whether or not you fall into a municipality or an unincorporated Orange County, please reach out. We'd be glad to figure that out for you and get you all the updated information.
Awesome. Okay, so some things you did in the community. Of course, if you have any questions, drop them in the chat and we'll answer them at the end. You went to a community safety meeting out in Ocoee.
Yeah. This was a really great, it's a great venture. I think this is the beginning of what is hopefully going to be more of these type meetings, because even though our West Orange community is fantastic, that there has been a cohesive dialogue with the municipalities, mayors, and managers, it doesn't always include all of the players, people that need to be engaged for safety reasons. And this particular event was planned by an Ocoee commissioner who wanted to really bring all the unusual suspects in the room, right? So this included law enforcement from the municipalities, the sheriff's department, the fire department, commissioners from Oakland, Windermere, Winter Garden, Ocoee, Orlando was invited. We were invited. The mayor's office was there represented, and even Representative Val Demings had a representative there for her office. So there was state, federal, local, municipal, And so it was a room full of people and nonprofit partners. I was able to actually sit next to Pastor Scott, and so the safety conversation sounds really broad. It was broad, but the agenda really asked for participants to identify what their biggest concerns were. And then what we were supposed to do there is round table up and start thinking of solutions, and then share what we saw as potential solutions, even if they were sort of pie in the sky solutions, but just to start the dialogue about how to make sure that all of these parties and entities were collaborating. And, hearing from Pastor Scott was a really important thing, because as I think many people out in Winter Garden know, there was an event or incident where law enforcement from a municipality didn't utilize the services in that municipality when they came across an individual who was homeless and having a crisis of some kind, and instead drove him out through a different municipality and into Winter Garden to Matthew's Hope to ask for help. Which, you know what, we get it, right? They do a great job, but the reality of it is that all of those entities had resources and could have really helped. It didn't have to be something that required a cross-county transport, and Matthew's Hope, which they don't take any government money at all, it ended up being sort of the final resolution there. So the idea of making sure that communication happens, that everybody understands that we are a community and that we should all be doing the best for our residents. And so really there was a lot of good stuff that came out of it.
Well, I know one major thing that was said at that meeting that you wanted to kind of, cover was about the budget.
Yeah, so it's a very interesting topic, because I think it's obviously really important that we keep an eye on where money is being spent. Right now, the tax and budget line items that are happening at the state, the local, and the federal level are newsworthy and have been a topic of a lot of conversation. We know that right now the administration in Washington, the Biden administration, is really looking to make sure that they're shoring up local communities and states. And there was a conversation that came up from some of the commissioners of the municipalities about the county getting, and I'm going to quote here, the lion's share of the money coming from the federal government, and how do we leverage that and make sure that this municipality is getting its cut, is basically the way it was said. And I want to make sure that any opportunity I have to explain that it doesn't happen that way, there isn't going to be a sack of money left on the front step of the Orange County administration building, that we actually will get very specific guidelines from the Treasury Department about the way the money is supposed to be spent and how it is reported, and how all those things really fall into prioritizations based on kind of, I would say, national projects, right? So you can talk about the mental health component of this. When money comes down, and I don't know this because we have not gotten Treasury guidance incomplete yet, but my assumption is based on seeing the way that some of the other federal funds and state funds come in, is that we then have to supply the information for where the greatest need is, where our nonprofit partners will be contracted, how the disbursement will go, and what the reporting and data of how that's being used goes back to the state or federal government. So, and I think that we're going to try to make sure that we continue to talk to our municipal partners so they understand that within the discretion of the county, we're going to try to make sure, and I can guarantee you, I'm going to make sure that as much as I can get out into District 1, I'm going to get out there, because District 1 has been a lot of times, I think, overlooked for some of the resources that are really needed, but that we really do still operate in very much a narrow scope of appropriations. And that what that means is that, our departments here during budgeting, they come forward and say, these are the projects that we've been waiting for, whether it's a new drainage system or a new building that we needed for something, a community center or what have you, that those capital projects oftentimes, wait in line to be budgeted for. And then all the supplemental funds that go into any of those expenses really are accounted for within their departments, and then can be championed by obviously a district that needs the resource. But yeah, it's not like a lump sum that gets divvied out like
Like
playing
Joe
cards.
Biden's like Santa and he has
Right,
a big sack of money on his back
right,
and he just comes to the county and drops it off.
right. And we're like, oh, I'll take this little pile, and
Yeah.
So, and I do love the conversation though, because I think it gives us an opportunity to really share some of those. We've been having budget conversations with all the departments here, so we really understand so much better now how it divides up and what that timeline looks like for the projects that they've been working on, and how some of those things are long term, some are short term. A lot of budget goes into things like making sure that the employees have insurance and their pensions, and a lot of it goes into the hiring process and making sure that we're staffing as we grow, because growing is expensive. And I know that people think of development as being an economic boom, but it's also a very expensive prospect, because for every new neighborhood, how many teachers, how many firefighters, how many police officers, what goes into the public works departments to make sure that those roadways are. So there's that I think Pastor Scott said, you think of the development as being like you drop the stone and you think about where it lands. Well, it's not just dropping the stone in the water. What are the ripples? Those ripple effects going out. And he really did a great job of describing when you see a bear wandering through a neighborhood, that's not because the bear's lost. That's because we built into their neighborhood. And the same thing holds true for our homeless population. Oftentimes they're not there because they chose to be there, or because they decided that they just didn't want to be part of a working population anymore. Something happened to displace them. And how we are going to respond was really the crux of a lot of this conversation. And I love that he had an opportunity to get up and speak for our table, because he has so much experience out in West Orange County, and really having to navigate these different bureaucracies to help his people and help the most people.
Yeah, communication is key, and I think there's a lot going on, and everybody has limited resources
And unlimited needs.
and unlimited needs. When it comes to safety, you had a meeting with the sheriff's office today, which was really great.
Yeah, so Under Sheriff Canty, I got to meet, we had spoken on the phone before, when I came into office, and just some, trying to help some residents. We've had the opportunity, but it was really great to meet him face to face yesterday at the Ocoee Roundtable.
Out of your little Zoom
Yes,
square.
we jumped out of the squares. And then again today, because we just want to make sure that we understand that right now there is a problem with gun violence. There's been some really tragic shootings in West Orange County, and I think it's probably going to get worse before it gets better. And I just want to make sure that we are working really, really closely with our law enforcement partners on how to best engage the community, build the trust. We need to be partners with the sheriff's department. They need to be partners with all those municipal departments. I was very encouraged by the things that we talked about today. How did you feel about it?
Well, my favorite part, I don't know if you want me to spoil it because I wrote it down. I love the fact that they have a behavioral response unit that they're engaging right now, which I feel is like, you brought up something that is such a misconception in our community, which is that defund the police conversation, right? Allocating funds and where. I think right now to hear that there's a budget allocation and an overall shift in how they enforce and I guess triage different cases is so awesome.
Well, I mean, I think this is what I said today, is the semantics of it. People get caught up in the defund the police idea. I mean, let's just take those words and toss them out. And let's talk about trying to provide a behavioral specialist, a mental health specialist where those calls require it. Let's talk about making sure there's enough training and support for the officers that are out there risking their lives every day. Let's try to make sure that, like, the times that we are investing in equipment, it's things that will help keep our civilians and our officers safe, right? So it's not cheap to put a camera on every deputy, every officer, every car, but those things are that help keep them safe and help keep us safe. But that's an investment, right? And so I think when you talk to a lot of the people who really want to see social justice make its mark and be, we can really say that this last year has opened our eyes to so many of the things that we understand as systemic issues. But it's not the same thing as disbanding or defunding our police departments, understanding that the best way for us to really go forward is to give the resources they need to keep everybody safe, right? To serve and protect. And so,
and to vet and make sure that training is up to date, and
that takes money and time.
Make sure that their officers have the access to mental health resources for
mental
themselves.
Health resources, like sensitivity training, community training, the things, those take money and time. So it's not an all or nothing. It's okay, how do we get there? And it is absolutely the understanding about the mental health component is so critical. We got an opportunity a while ago to tour our corrections facility here in Orange County, and it is really in some ways, our modern day critical mental health unit, because we don't have long-term inpatient mental health units. And so what happens is our law enforcement community, our corrections community end up having to be the stopgap. And that's not okay. So looking at that investment for mental health and making sure that we have opportunities to treat people that don't involve law enforcement and don't involve corrections is going to be the answer to so much of the suffering that we're seeing now. I think about this behavioral mental health, behavioral clinical partnership pilot program with the Sheriff's Department provides, it's a pilot program, which means there's an investment that the county made. It was actually on the BCC agenda, I think a little over a month ago, maybe a couple months ago. And it coincided actually with the Citizen Safety Council recommendation. So it falls really in with their recommendation. So part of that investment, and hopefully the data we see will drive more of that investment, because law enforcement can't be, the therapist, the marriage counselor, the drug rehab specialist. It's not practical, feasible, or affordable for society. So it was a great conversation with the Sheriff's Department. Loved hearing about those plans. Really enjoyed also hearing about their relationships and history in West Orange County. So we had, a Evans grad, we had a West Orange grad at the table, and these are like your highest high-ups in the Sheriff's Department, which is really cool, because that means also that they understand the community and the dynamic and the relationship. So that gives me a sense of, the kind of the team feel. So hopefully this was the beginning of many, many good conversations and ideas to really include the community every chance we get.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to continue that conversation. I think, you taught me something in that meeting that I never thought about, was the unfunded mandates. I was very interested in learning more about that, because it sounds like there are certain requirements that are being mandated, but yet there's no budget to actually see it through. And so it sounds like the sheriff's office is left to scramble and figure out where they're going to get the resources to do something that, like, I remember there was that big conversation about having police officers at every school. That wasn't funded.
No.
So they said, you have to do this thing, but you don't have a budget.
It happens specifically, I think, I would say in the education world all the time. We passed a class size amendment, which I voted for and agree with. I think we know that education works best in smaller groups. It wasn't funded. And I mean, the legislature could have funded that. The legislature could have funded the Marjory Stoneman Douglas Safety Act, which is what Lee is referring to, was a result of the information that came from the task force after the tragic shooting, which included a bell-to-bell full-time SRO, a school resource officer. Well, in my head, I kind of thought we had that type of coverage, because I'd been a public school mom and volunteered and worked in public schools, since I've been in Orange County, but I didn't realize that what that mandate did not include is if that police officer has to go to court, which is what police officers do, right? Sheriff's deputies have to go if they have a case that they need to give their evidence in court. Before that would just happen, and now they have to bring in basically another full time. So their staffing, you can imagine the amount of money that would go into the staffing that would then take place that didn't come from any kind of an additional funds from the state. And that it happens all the time. And I think identifying those things as they move through the state legislature so that people understand, this may look like a really good idea, but unless the legislature puts in a funding mechanism, then it either gets pushed back to whatever department that is, or it's going to come from somewhere else. So, when we talk about the arts programs in our public schools losing their funding, it's not just they're losing their funding, it's probably going to somewhere else where they had to put it. And I don't know what that is. I'm not an expert in their budget because I know it's very complex. But typically it's because there is some kind of a push and pull when there's a mandate that comes down from the state. And so we'll see how that plays out in this next legislative session, and some of the things that were moved forward that we know were not great initiatives. We've seen lots of really awful bills coming out of Tallahassee, and it'll probably come up again that we are we'll end up footing the bill for something that Tallahassee thought was a good idea.
I was one of those people who was screaming defund the police and marching and things like that, and watching videos from the New York Times and Vox, and getting so consumed with the conversation because it just felt like it's a part of our history right now, but right. I still feel, when I look at like the city of Orlando, last year I made a post about how they spent more than 32% on their police department and less than 2% on their affordable housing. I grew up around a lot of crime, and a lot of the good people that didn't want to sell drugs, let's say, did it to pay their bills so that they can afford to stay in their affordable housing. It's like, how do you distribute resources so that you can get ahead of this, what I feel is like almost like a pit of resources to aid to the symptoms rather than to get straight to the root of the problems.
I think we go back to educational opportunities.
Yeah.
Economic opportunities. I think lifting out of, get that poverty, the poverty portion of that is, I think obviously a very big part of it. I mean, I think addictions are going to be part of human nature, but I think when poverty and sort of these economic deserts crisscross, with the availability of drugs as a commerce, as an item of commerce, then you end up with more addictions issues. But we have to look at the global picture. And I agree. I think this last year, you couldn't watch the news and not really feel so angry about, and, even recently about what we see happening to our underserved communities, our minority communities, in places where, I think before video cameras, this was, obviously always happening. It's just now we're seeing it. But sitting there today, did you have a different feel?
I did. Yeah, especially when I learned about the unfunded mandates, because sometimes when you're looking at a budget and your hands are tied behind your back because of decisions that somebody else in a room who probably never went through the training or never went through the streets that you went through, you're now being in a situation where you're forced to reallocate resources. So definitely added some perspective, but
it's like my saying about there's that good bad, right? And I know that there's very obvious times where there's a good bad choice to be made, but a lot of times what it is it's the idea that that there's been suffering, what is the historical cause of that or root of that, and then go to that, right? Pinpoint that. I think, and I've said this before, I think a lot of our issues here, in the South and really all over the country have been sometimes that the independent prosecutor and how that pipeline works. I don't think taking a budget away from the people who we know right now are getting our kids across the street safely, and who, if somebody's crawling in your window in the middle of the night, trying to take your jewelry, that taking away that funding isn't what you want. That's not what anybody wants. So those things you don't have to be somebody who is that is all this or all that. Like, I really think that getting to the root of our systemic racial biases is education. I think it's training. I think it's incorporating the voices of all, making sure all of the groups who haven't been listened to in the community are listened to, because then you find what parts of that system didn't work for them. So yeah, it was. I mean, it's been a very interesting. It's been an interesting
learning curve.
Yeah.
The last two things before we wrap up, we talked about racing and helicopters. For those of you who email us.
Yes, we did not know where to go with the helicopter conversation anymore because it's such a strange one. But they did have some, like, well, maybe we can check with
the FAA, the Flight Authority, Aviation Authority.
Yes, so because we've looked at the flight plans and we're not quite sure still how it doesn't look like they should be affecting the areas that we're hearing from that are feeling affected. So we haven't given up on that. We're hoping that there's going to be some more information that we get. We keep asking questions. You never know where you're going to get the answer that makes it all come together. You know what else I wanted to talk about really quickly that made me think of it when we talked about the helicopter? I just want to say thank you to the Universal folks who decided to go ahead and up the ante and go to the $15 an hour. You now set the standard and you set the stage, and I talk about all the time that our economic drivers have to make these decisions and push it forward, and then everyone will follow.
I hated hearing everybody say, oh, everyone's just living it up on unemployment. And it's like,
oh, no.
Unemployment is nothing.
No, right. I brought this up at our CAB meeting because I've talked to so many people that the reason why they're not going back to whatever that hospitality job was is because they had a year to literally get another skill. So like, I know people who've become phlebotomists. I've talked to some folks that actually got like other jobs kind of in a medical tech situation, some people that switched into construction type roles because that industry kept going. And I think it was it seems so belittling to say, oh, they're just sitting back and taking their unemployment checks and they're taking their stimulus checks. I'm like, no, they had a year to figure out that actually they were working in an industry that maybe wasn't paying them what they were worth. And so now you're seeing that Universal, I think, heard that, and they're upping the ante, and hopefully that'll make everybody more competitive, and the outcome will be a better workforce and a better community, a better environment.
Happier people that are coming to work that want to give it their all because now they can afford to give it the time and energy.
Right, and we understand $50 an hour isn't like, you're not
you're not popping champagne every day.
That is, for starting in an entry place, it's like, okay.
You can afford maybe your rent without having to get a second job.
And it's from there. I understand that if you can move up from there, and I know that Universal is one of those places that people, and it's some of those where they really do. There's an upward mobility, and I think that that's a great thing to set that bar there, and hopefully everybody else will follow suit.
Yeah, but back to the racing. We did talk to because I promised the constituents who have been reaching out. It's not just you. Yeah. It is everywhere. I hear it.
So
do you hear it?
Yes. And they talked about the multi-county work that they're doing on a task force. And we're probably not calling it the right thing because I have really cool acronyms for everything. Working on this issue. And so hopefully, and they know that, you can kind of quiet it down and then it bubbles back up and you can quiet it down. We are also looking at, I have been trying to talk to, people in Metroplan Orlando and at DOT and anybody that will listen to me about the idea that enforcement isn't going to be the total answer, that we also need to look at design and infrastructure in order to decrease the ability to get to those speeds, right? So, getting a roundabout where there was a 4-way stop sign that people were blowing through and hurting other people, because you can't do that at a roundabout, is something that we need to continue to consider. I know you can't do that with every thoroughfare, but if we've at least done that with some of our residential thoroughfares and slowed it down visually, where people are not picking up speeds, and you can do that with tree plantings and other kind of visual obstacles, barriers that slow down the speed, that maybe that'll push some of the higher speed traffic out into the major arteries, and maybe it'll keep some of those late night racers from being I don't know if we're going to be able to keep them on 5-4. I don't really know how that works, but we'll keep trying. It's a crazy, to me, sounds like a deadly game, but
Yeah. Well,
stay safe out there this weekend. It is a holiday weekend.
yes.
And I know that, I was speaking to some of the other law enforcement officers yesterday at that safety at the round table, and they talked about the holiday weekends that is always there. There's always concern for drinking and driving and boating, drinking and boating. Please, 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 please.
And Memorial Day.
Yes, Memorial Day. We are grateful to be, we're going to remember all of our servicemen and women and people who sacrificed for us to have this conversation freely. It makes me very grateful.
Yeah, it's like, wow, I'm a woman. I can drive a car. I can wear a skirt. I can get an education. I can own a home. This is America.
You can yell defund the police.
I can vote. I know.
You can yell at me. The people yell at us every 2 weeks. I'm like, you know what? First Amendment, baby, bring it on.
Yeah, it just feels like, wow. So hug a veteran.
People fought and died for that. So
hug a veteran today.
Exactly.
Anything else that you want to salute everyone? Oh, I'm sorry. If you wrote a question and we didn't answer it, we will write to you on the district1@ocfl.net, or we'll reply in the comments. We ran over time, so.
Yes, thank you. I really appreciate it. Have a great weekend.
Have a great weekend. Bye.